Leaving the military can feel like somebody just kicked the legs out from under your whole life. The familiar routine is gone, your life's mission is fuzzy, and all the stuff that you were trained to shove down starts making things at home, at work, and in other places in your life a lot more difficult. But you can rebuild without pretending that the hard parts never happened. My guest today, Army veteran Eric Gillis, gives a real no BS look at life after the military, including the struggle to adjust, family pressures, dark thoughts, trying counseling, and finding purpose and structure that actually help you move forward. By the time you're done with this episode, you'll have a better feel for how staying quiet can tear someone apart, how asking for help can completely change where your life is headed, and how the same discipline that got you through your time in uniform can help you build something meaningful after service. But before we get into this episode, I want to take a moment to raise awareness for something deeply important to our community, the Global War on Terrorism Memorial Foundation. This organization is working to build a permanent national memorial in Washington, D.C. to honor the service members, families, and civilians who are impacted by the global war on terrorism. This memorial will be both a tribute to those who served and a way to ensure that their sacrifices are recognized and remembered for generations to come. If you want to learn more or find out how you can support their mission, visit gwatmemorialfoundation.org. Now let's get into today's episode. Hey, Eric, welcome to the show. Really glad to have you here.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm looking forward to our time together.
Yeah, you bet. Absolutely. Before we jump into everything, for the listeners who maybe aren't super familiar with you and your background and everything, could you just give a quick background info on yourself and who you are?
Yeah, so I am an Army veteran that military and struggled for years trying to figure out my place outside of the world of the military. And in that whole journey, I have decided recently to publish a book called The Rebuilt Warrior. Currently, if you were to ask me who I am, I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm an educational administrator at a middle school here in the state of Florida, and an author with trying to build this brand that other veterans figure out how to rebuild themselves when they get out and they find their struggles. And then my wife and I own a couple businesses, being a vacation rental company here in the Panhandle of Florida, and so just a lot of different things going on. But but I am thankfully someone who overcame what I thought I would be a statistic of, someone who just couldn't take it and ended it, and I'm now to share that journey with others.
And that's such an important thing. A couple of things actually that you mentioned there is that the veterans who are getting out of the military, having a rocky time, they're not alone. That happens all the time. And, I wish there was a magic wand that we could just wave over everybody getting out of the military and all of a sudden, it's just going to be a smooth sailing for you. But part of it is you kind of have to figure out where is your place in the world. It's so long we spend in the military. I don't care if you were in for, one enlistment or you spent 20 years plus years, going on in the military. So much of that is being told what to do, where to go, what to wear, when you can eat, when you can, shower, sleep, and all the things that you, on a day-to-day basis and in the civilian world, you have to make all those decisions for yourself. Basically, everybody's told, what you need to do. And when you have all that stuff just laid out for you, sometimes it's a tough transition to go make all those decisions for yourself. But also get there and telling your story and sharing it with other folks, I think is important as it other people that, hey, you're a real guy. You had real problems. You had real situations that you were dealing with, and now here you are. I don't want to say you figured it out, like you got the whole world, all figured out, but because none of us do, but you figured out how to move forward from that position that you were in, and hopefully the lessons that you learned along the way can make it a little bit easier trying to figure out their place in the world. So I think all that's super awesome that you're doing, and let's kind of get into it here. So
Yeah, absolutely.
Share a little bit more about kind of the challenges that you had after leaving the military and what overcome throughout all of that.
Yeah, you said it best in that when I was in the military, everything was decided for you. Literally everything you did was structured for you. and you don't, that was the one I knew, getting out, finding a job, and there was obstacles I knew I would face, but I never until in recent years realized how important the structure was for me, that I knew what I was going to do, what to expect. I knew everything was laid out for me and to get out. And so when I got out of the military, I was leaving an infantry unit. I was not an infantry man, but I was leaving an infantry unit, and so there was this stigma where you just didn't talk. And we were coming back from Iraq, and I was with those infantry guys, and they were like asking us, "Hey, are there any problems?" And all of them were like, "Don't say a word." And you're like, "Okay, I'm not going to say anything. I care." And so that mindset carried on when I got out of the military.
Right.
And so not only trying to find structure, but also having all these internal struggles and feeling like I couldn't say anything about them because one, I didn't want to break that code that I promised those guys. But two is I served with guys who paid such a greater price than me, guys who had physical ailments from it, and then guys who ultimately paid that biggest price of losing their life. And I thought, I can't say a word. And so that made that transition even more difficult for me because I bottled up so much that I was going through because I felt like I just couldn't say anything.
Yeah, and so many people have that same thing, myself included. I remember coming back from deployment to Afghanistan, and you go through those mandatory mental health screenings and all that stuff,
Yeah,
and they ask you, how you sleep in, are you, all the things that they normally ask to kind of get a assessment of your mental state. And it's like, oh no, everything's
right,
fine, everything's good. It was like far from it. It was like
right,
probably the furthest from it that it could have been, and I was probably the exact person that they were looking for in terms of getting them to get help in therapy and all that kind of stuff. But
mm,
I didn't want it. I didn't want anything to do with it. I mean, I just spent all this time away from my family. It's like, no, I want to go back to my family, and I don't want to be
right,
I don't want to be forced to go to some counseling and things like that. Like
hmm,
I'll be fine. And
right,
I think a lot of the mindset that we have, um, and it sucks that we have that
yeah,
mindset, but we do, and fortunately, I think things a little bit, and
I did
they're
too.
getting better, than they used to be.
Hmm.
We're looking back now, almost 16 years now for me, coming back, but it's a whole mindset, right? And I think
Hmm.
that's kind of leads into the next thing I wanted to talk about is that mindset shift. With that idea that you can't go back, but you can become something better
Right.
than where you're at right now. You don't have to be stuck this whole time. How did that realization influence your journey along this whole transition?
Yeah. So I was struggling when I got out. I didn't know any of the problems I had. I didn't know about PTSD, and I just knew that I couldn't sleep. When I did sleep, I woke up with very vivid dreams, and still picture myself being over there. I knew like I would lay on the floor in the prone position, watching out, just afraid, just hyper vigilant all the time. And so I'd reached this breaking point where my wife at the time said to me, either get some help or me and your kids are leaving. And my oldest son was about 4, my youngest son was not quite 2. And ultimately, what it led to me was I reached the point where I was like, well, they're better off without me. And I sat there one night in 2009 in the living room, everyone's in bed, and I took a handful of muscle relaxers that I thought would end my life, but it really became the catapult to the story that I tell now. It didn't end my life. I got help. I went to counseling, and a doctor said something powerful that's kind of become the motto of my whole life. I was crying. I just wanted to go back to who I was, the 18-year-old who graduated high school, was happy, loved the world. I want to go back to that person. And the doctor looked at me and said, you'll never be that person, but you can be better. And that statement of you can be better just became the catalyst for my life of like, okay, I may never be that person. That's okay, but I can be better. And that's what I started. And so better meant for me going to counseling. Better meant for me looking for ways that I could be more involved in my children's life. Better for me meant going and getting a college degree, finding a career that made me happy. But yeah, it all started from that statement from a counselor sitting there and the counselor saying, you can be better. And that changed everything for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And all the experiences that you have in life, whether it's through the military or just normal day to day life, you don't even have to be a veteran. Anything that you experience, it's going to have an impact on you, good and bad,
Hmm.
and it's going to change your outlook and your perspective on things sometimes, and you are going to be what you make of that, and you're only going to be as good as you allow your to be. And if you decide that, hey, I'm just going to be stuck in this position, and I think a lot of us get that way. We kind of just feel like we're stuck, and maybe I don't know what the right answer to why we feel that way, but a lot of times we're just stuck,
Yeah.
and then we feel like there's nothing better than what it is right now. This is as good as it gets, and this sucks. So that's why a lot of people probably end up making the same kind of decision that you were talking about, and decide that, hey, you know what, if it gets any better, I don't want any part of it, and just let's end it right now. And
Yeah.
that's not the way we want things to be here.
No,
Obviously.
there was a hopelessness I felt there that it's hard for me to even put into words.
Sure.
But I just looked at the future and I thought, my kids are not going to want to be around me. My wife doesn't want to be around me. I was in isolation, so I felt no one wanted to be around me. And it was a hopelessness that I had created in myself. It wasn't real.
Yeah.
But I had reached the point, and so I can understand where that decision comes from when people make that awful decision that you can't come back from. It's because you feel a hopelessness where you go, if this is the best life has to offer me, I don't want to live this life anymore. And I think that's kind of been the undertone of what my message is to others, is that but life can be better. It may not be the picturesque thing that you think it's going to be, but life can be better. You can find happiness in little things.
Sure.
And that's what I've learned is like, I can look back now and go, I don't want to be that 18-year-old kid. I was dumb and had not experiences in the world, but I had fantasized that was the perfect person. And I can look back now and go, that was dumb. Like that doctor, there was a shaking on me of going, you can't be that person, but you can be better. And it's like, yeah, I'm way better than I was as an 18-year-old kid. But in the moment of hopelessness, you definitely don't feel that way. You feel like this is it. I can't go forward. And so if this is what life is, then I don't want to live this life.
Yeah.
I'm so thankful. There's a lot of failures in my life that I learned from, a lot of failures that I still struggle with a lesson from. That's the biggest failure that I'm glad I failed at, is that I failed taking my own life.
Yeah, no, that's actually a great way to think of it too. Is as a failure, but as a good one. Not all failures are bad.
It really became a success.
Sure.
And helped out. Obviously, helped so much in my now.
Yeah, absolutely. And that the ripple effect of some decision that it has on not just the immediate family members, your kids, your wife, and the folks who are closest to you, but then the ripple effect of how it affects those people who are close to those people as well, and then those compounding effects, it goes out and further and further, and it ends up having an effect on tons of people who you may not even know all the people who it may affect, and it just ends up hurting so many people, and it really transfers that pain from the person who's suffering right now in that moment to other people, and that's if you think about it, it's really not fair to those people either. To put that on them. So figuring out the way you did, how to deal with it, and how to reframe your mind and move forward is way better. And then doing something like you're doing with the Rebuilt Warrior, and doing all that stuff that you're up to now. It only takes that negative and turns in, but it takes somebody else's negative situation and it become a positive as well. Tell us a little bit more about the Rebuilt Warrior and what that's all about.
Yeah, so it was so I guess maybe about 8 years ago, I was really silent about my struggles and about the attempt to take my own life because a lot of it was embarrassment. And one day I was working at a middle school, and they go, "Hey, Veterans Day's coming up. You're a veteran. Why don't you just share something about Veterans Day?" And I was like, "Okay, sure." It was like they didn't know what to do, and they asked me, and I was like, "Sure, I'll be happy to." And so I went and I shared just my story, and it was the first time I'd ever shared about that struggle. I shared about that transition. And even though I live in an area where there's a couple of Air Force bases and Navy bases, a lot of people, the average person doesn't have a true idea of what someone who served in the military goes through. And I remember the emotion from the people words, but what stuck out to me the most was guys who were veterans, who were going through similar struggles, who had kept silent, felt in that moment a safe space to come and have a conversation with me. And so I just began to share. I was working with somebody who got out of the military, and he was telling me about a road rage incident where he went and slashed the tires of somebody. And I was like, hang on, let's talk through this. And let me tell you about what I went through. And so it was just kind of that. And about 4 years ago, I decided I just wanted to put it into writing. And the main reason I wanted to put it into writing is because I just wanted to help. No aspirations of anything beyond that. I want to help others. And so I worked on that. And probably it's whenever I kind of finished for the first time the book, the things that I've been through, and started letting people close to me read it. And so that's where it came from. And the whole goal is that I want to help other veterans and other military leaders, but specifically veterans, make that successful transition from out of the military into civilian world. Because what I've learned is, so I work as an administrator at a middle school. We have 9 other veterans that work there, and they are the hardest working people that we have. And that's what I want other veterans to see is like, you are so valuable. There's companies that would love to have your work ethic, your discipline, your selflessness, all those wonderful attributes the military instilled in you. They want those in a civilian job because it's so valuable. And so that is the heart of what I'm doing, is to help them understand transition and then how they can use their skills to be that. And some of them are going to be broken like I was. And so that's that rebuilt warrior. And that's how I came up with this framework called structure, because when I got out of the military, I realized when I was reflecting back of like the biggest thing I missed was structure. I missed knowing when to wake up in the morning. And then I would go to PT and I would go to eat breakfast. And at 9 o'clock I was dressed and I was reporting to duty. And from 9 o'clock to 5 o'clock, I was going to be doing these specific tasks. And at 5 o'clock, I was going to come home, and that became the routine of my life. And even when I got out, I worked as a contractor for the military. And so it was just that I was just used to that structure, and that was stripped away from me when I got out. And there is no organization that's going to give that to you. You have to build that yourself. And so that's where I was able to look back at my successes and go, okay, it's because I decided along the way that I needed some structure, and I built structure in my life. And I think that's one of the key ingredients for a lot of veterans as they're transitioning out, is figure out what that structure looks like, build it, and become disciplined towards it.
Yeah, I think I've realized that as well, because I used to just be all over the board with that structure aspect in my own life. There's very little consistency with, even the little things like, when I went to bed or when I woke up or, any of those things. I just had no discipline to keep that in order. And eventually I was like, I got to figure something out here. And so, at least, going to bed, waking up, like I try to do those on a, fairly regular schedule, going to the gym and all those types of things. I try to just make sure that that's part of my day and it's part of the routine. Right. And then, everything I can fit in, where the schedule allows. And if there's not time today, there'll be time tomorrow, and I'll figure it out, and I'll just make it work. So, it takes that chaos that you might feel when you're getting out, when you're like, you got to figure out the whole world. At least you got some structure in place, and then when things can fit in to your schedule, to your routine. Of course, there's going to be things here and there that, you're going to have an early morning flight or something like that. You're going to have to wake up earlier, something like that. Of course, there's going to be those things that come up every once in a while, but, in general, your life is going to be pretty much well structured, and you get to move from that chaos to a more steady environment that you can kind of control at that point. And it gives you control back in your life, and that's something I think important, especially for those people who are just, seems like they're spiraling out of control. They don't know what to do with themselves afterwards, and so just give yourself a little bit of that structure. And I like that word that you structure for this, because it really is. It's you're putting up the guardrails, and you're giving yourself a solid foundation to stand, right?
Yeah. No, you're exactly right. And that was the mindset of it, of like, I'll tell you, and you probably know this, like the structure is so consistent in the military. Even like when it comes to, I got out, I didn't know anything about health insurance. I didn't know about paying for your housing, because they did everything for you. And so, when you get out, it's not just like, I lose this, like be here at this time, and I got this and this plan going on. It's also like, I didn't know how to, and so it caused all kind of financial issues when I first got out, because I was like, oh, it costs $1,200 to rent a house. You don't just take that out of my pay. I have to now come up with that money. And
Right.
yeah, my wife at the time was a diabetic, and it was like, wait, all of her medicines were free. Now we're paying hundreds of dollars a month. For, it's just,
Yep.
yeah, it is that thing of I go from structure to chaos. Now, how do I get back some sort of structure in the midst of that chaos? And that's where that's where I build it. And of course, it comes from the military. Everything's an acronym, and so that's what structure is. It's an acronym on how to rebuild yourself. And
Okay.
the S is for self-assessment. And it's what I did when I went to counseling. It was, I finally stopped blaming everything else. I was blaming the military. I was blaming other people. And it allowed me to look at myself and go, all right, what good do I have? What strengths do I have? And then like, what are my weaknesses and how can I fix them? And that was the start of that. And the T for structure was translation. It was like, how do I now translate my strengths into something productive? Not only as someone trying to get into the workforce, but even as just in relationships, how do I translate my strengths? And the R was the one that was the easiest for me. It was responsibility, because in the military, it was all about taking ownership of your stuff. And so it was like, all right, I've self-assessed, I've translated. Now I got to take responsibility of the things that I can control. And there were quite a few things that I could control. And so it was taking responsibility for those, because there was times that I got out and I lost jobs because of my temper. And it was, again, easy for me to go, that was somebody else's fault. And it was like, no, that's my responsibility. I'm in control of me, and I got to take ownership of that if I plan on having any success moving forward. And then it was, the thing I loved about the military was the unity of mission. And that was what the U was, of the unity of mission, of we all work towards a similar purpose. When I went to basic training, I remember the drill sergeant standing there, and we had the painted middle area that nobody could walk. But I remember the drill sergeant the first night gave us a speech of the American flag, and this tough, rugged man almost got teary-eyed talking about, this is your purpose and this is what you're willing to die for. And it stirred up inside of me this realization. I was like, yeah, that's what my purpose is. Well, when you get out of the military, a lot of times you lose that purpose. You're like, what do I do now? And that's where that structure comes in, of what is the unity of mission. And so, like, when I work at a school, my purpose there is to make sure the kids are successful and safe. When I'm working within the relationships of my family, it's making sure my wife feels cared for, loved, make sure she feels like she's set up for success. My kids feel like they're getting the items and the skills they need to be. And so it's that move to controlled execution. And that controlled execution was all about the discipline that made me consistent. And that's where discipline came in. And for me, I was almost 350 pounds at the time. So well over 100 pounds more than what I am now. And it was because I didn't have any discipline in my life. I didn't control the execution in my life. It was, I would start something and fail and just move on, start something and fail. And it was that pattern of being a failure and accepting that. It was like, nope, not going to accept that anymore. I've knocked on the door of responsibility. Now I'm going to this controlled execution, which means I'm going to be disciplined and consistent in my own life. And that's what that helped. And then the T was trust building. It was, how am I going to be credible in my consistency? And trust was huge, because I tell the story in my book of one night we were in downtown Samara, Iraq. And I remember gunshots going off all around me. I remember you would hear the sound of mortars, of whistling, and I remember looking, and I was a chaplain assistant, and so the job while we were deployed was the chaplain was a non-combatant, so I was protecting him. And I remember looking in this chaos and seeing the chaplain fall asleep, and I thought, that man trusts me so much that he's willing to go to sleep in the middle of a war, like knowing that fire. And then I fell asleep and woke up the next morning, and it was all about this trust that we had built amongst each other. I trusted the guys on the outside watching guard. My chaplain trusted that I was going to make sure he was safe. And there was this circular role of trusting. And so that's what I had to get back to, is learning to trust people again, because I had lost a lot of that, and a lot of that was my own fault. And then it was understanding systems, because I was loving having SOPs and field manuals. I mean, I always tell you, if you wanted to go use the bathroom, there was a field manual that told you how to do it. You know, if you wanted to, how to sweep your floor, how to keep your room clean, it was like there was an SOP or a field manual for everything. Yep. And you get out, and there's so much gray area in the stuff you're working in. And so I had to learn how to fix systems learn what the symptoms were, how to fix them, and grow from that. And then the biggest one was the next R, which was resilience, because that was where I struggled the most. Was that when adversity would hit, I was not what I used to be. Like I think back to when I was deployed, and I remember one time we were at a local Iraqi school and built a playground, and we were talking to the local leaders there, and the chaplain was there, and the battalion commander was there. We were talking to them, and out of nowhere, boom, an RPG hits. And I remember I grabbed the chaplain, got him in the back of a Bradley. The guys returned to fire. They neutralized the threat immediately. And I look at that adversity and I go, everybody just did what to do because they were all trained for that. And then I get out of the military and adversity hits and I just ball up into a turtle position on the ground, sucking my thumb like a child going, what am I going to do now? And it was like the military instilled all this resiliency inside of you. You know, go and live within that resiliency. And the final E was evaluation. And it's this idea of a circular, that I've went through this whole framework of structure and I get to evaluation and I go, okay, now what's next for me? Mm-hmm. And then it starts structure again. And so like, I got out of the military, I struggled, I went into education. I reached a point in education where I felt like I wanted to be beyond just being a teacher and to be an administrator. And so I reached that evaluation and I said, all right, I'm going to start over. And so I started over with structure. My wife and I decided to buy a company, and we started that structure process over. And so that's what it's meant to be, this circular thing of now what? Evaluate yourself, now self-assessment, translation, responsibility, and it just grows you in every aspect of your life. And that's what it was for my life.
Yeah, I like how that's kind of circular. I'm screwing up the word here. There's a cycle to it.
Yeah.
Feeling like Porky the Pig right now. Where you get kind of in, but it's not the end because it starts all over again. And there's a whole life cycle that goes with this. And so, you know, when a new stage of life, once when you've, you know, achieved, you know, whatever that you were trying to achieve, it doesn't mean that the process is over. There's still more life to have, and there's still more growth to have, and that's, I think, going back to what that doctor told you way back when he, you know, you can't be that person anymore that you were at, you know, 18 or so, but you can be someone better. Well, of course you can be better because you're going to go through lots of changes. Life's going to throw you changes. I would argue that, you know, the time in the military, you know, all the good and the bad, probably most people a better person because you do have that discipline, you do have, you know, a set of skills, and you do, you know, things that you didn't necessarily have before getting into the military. But then you grow from that, and then you get out, and what's next? How do I use that springboard to that next thing? Again, you're gonna have to start with that self-assessment and figure out how that can be, how those skills and all that stuff that you've acquired over those years, how that can be used in the next phase of life. And once when you figure that out, then you're going to do it again and can evolve. You know, at some point you might, you know, you said, you know, starting off in, you know, education, teaching and stuff, but then eventually you wanted to move into administration. That's probably a set of skills than you use in the classroom versus, you know, doing the administrative work. So, you know, it's different, but it doesn't make it better or worse. It's just, you know, as you're evolving, if that's the direction you want to go, that's better. You know, if you're moving to something else and it's not what you want, well, then that's worse. And then you might have to reevaluate yourself and figure out where you need to go. But you know, in this case, it's moving in the right direction and pushing yourself through those, you know, adversities that you're to, you know, a way that you can use those adversities for growth and pushing forward to something just better overall, you know. You know, I wonder, you were in stay talk and how people kind of came up to you and in you someone that they can talk to, but how did you kind of encourage some folks to see the struggles that they were going through as opportunities for future growth?
Yeah, I think a lot of them were similar to what I was where we just, like, thing was defined by, like, the mission was a failure or the mission was a success. There was no middle ground. And for a lot of them, they needed to know that it was okay to struggle to get to success. Yeah. That just because you struggle doesn't mean you failed. If you quit, you failed. And so for a lot of them, it was they were struggling, and it was just they needed encouragement to keep pushing forward. They needed that battle buddy to come along beside them and go, all right, you're losing your strength. Let me help you get along the way. And for some of them, it was as simple as helping them understand that maybe the path they had taken wasn't correct. That was of the men that I talked to was they had just maybe chosen something that really truly didn't play to their strengths. It was me. I got out from being in the military, trying to work in a church where I was trying to help people, and I was so broken and needed so much help. It was the worst decision for me. It made my life more chaotic. When I left all that, it was like, all right, now my life is getting better. And so that's how it was for a lot of them, was to explain to them, like, you got to find the right thing. But what I learned with most of them is they just needed some encouragement, because they felt like that failure. They felt like the guy that I was when I sat in that living room floor, ready to let what I felt failure define my life. That's how they felt. And so it was, you're not a failure, keep moving forward. And that's where the idea of rebuilt warrior came from, is like, just rebuild yourself. Let the things that you went through strengthen you and refine you and rebuild you into something better. You can be better.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think an important thing to remember through all of this is that is something along the lines of what you just said, but you may not be in the position to be the helper, or to be the whatever it is that you want to be. You might have gotten out of the military saying, okay, I'm going to be this thing. I'm going to get a job doing this, or I'm going to start a family. I'm going to do something. And you might have it in your mind that that's what you want. That might be the ultimate goal, but you may not be in a place that you're ready for all of that stuff. And even some things, like you might have a job in mind, and you might need to go back to school and get a degree or something in order to get that job. There's some jobs that you don't have the degree, you're not going to get the job, period.
Right.
And there's other things too, just in your own mind. You're going to need to get those things right. You're going to get a job, and the people that you work with, you might work with some jerks. And if you're flying off the handle because you're working with someone who you can't stand, and you're always yelling at them and whatever, you're probably not going to have that job for much longer. So you got to figure out ways to get your anger under control and all that kind of stuff. There's just a whole host of things that you might need to work on first before you can get to whatever that ultimate goal is. And it doesn't mean just because you tried it and you couldn't get there, doesn't mean that you'll never get there. It just means that maybe there was something else that you needed to work on first before jumping into the deep end. You might crawl, walk, run like we do in the military. You might have to take it slow. It may not be a thing that you can do, immediately right off the bat. It's something you might have to take a little time and work at. But you do it right, it'll be worth it. But if you just go jump into the deep end, you're going to really feel like you're just barely treading water, and it's going to at some point become overwhelming, and it's not going to work out as well as you might think.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you talked about a lot about your personal recovery and the stuff that you went through, but you also had you did talk about your professional growth as well, with all the ventures that you're involved in, which on paper sounds like it's a lot of stuff that you have going on, the plates that you keep spinning, at the same time. How do you manage to balance all of these things as you are going through that evolution? Hey, I need to work on myself. All of a sudden, you have all these other things going on. Is it overwhelming at times, or do you feel some sense of calm in having a lot of things going on at the same time?
Yeah, it does get overwhelming at times, for sure. I think that it may sound cheesy, but so reflective on where I could be. Those moments, I just find so much happiness in that.
Sure.
That I have the ability to do these things, that I am here and present, able to do them. But it does get overwhelming. But I really feel like I've learned over the years to manage that well. That doesn't overtake me like it used to. It used to the least bit of stress me into a depression. And now I can see some of those things. My wife is wonderful at being able to spot some of those things. Like, even before I can notice them at times, she'll go, "Hey, I've noticed that you just don't seem as joyful lately. Is everything okay?" And so having that support too is huge. But But yeah, I think there is some comfort. I think that I'm so afraid at times to not be successful that that I will venture into something new to have a safety net in place. And so it's led me to where I am today, which I'm really happy about. But you have to be cautious at times because it is real easy to maybe take on things more. I've learned the power of no, and that's been helpful to be able to say no to things.
Yeah.
Like I was really active in coaching athletics for years, and this is the first year that I haven't. And it was the first time where I finally had to go, I just time for that. Like it doesn't bring me the return on investment that everything else does, especially because like my oldest son had graduated high school, and that was one of the major things was we stayed connected through sports. And so it was like, yeah, the return on investment isn't there. There's other things I can give my time and effort to that's going to have a better payoff for me and my family. And so
Sure.
learning those.
Yeah, I think the power of no is certainly a huge thing. I realized even with this podcast, just a few months ago, I was doing more episodes than I'm doing now, and I got to a point where I just felt like I was burning out and something had to give, and so I said, okay, let me scale it back. I'm not going to walk away from it altogether because I still like doing this and I like helping folks out and stuff, but it's just something I couldn't do as much as I was doing, and it actually out really great because not only I'm finding that I'm getting more listeners now, even with fewer episodes. I feel like the quality is improved and things are just better overall with it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a win-win all around. So you know, like in my case, I felt like I was maybe letting people down because I was stepping back. But then I looked at it and I'm like, well, I'm actually probably reaching even more people now than I was before.
Yeah.
So it has a nice way of surprising you. Sometimes you say no, it opens you up to being able to do other things that you maybe weren't able to do. And and that's by saying no to something, you're saying you're allowing yourself to say yes to something else, and that something else might be even bigger and better than whatever that thing was that you said no to. And so don't necessarily feel bad. Don't say no to everything, but say no to the things that, like in your case, you said that just didn't have the return on investment, and it doesn't have to be financial investment either.
Right.
Your time, your energy, your resources, whatever it is. If that's not filling your cup up and it's not making you energized or happy the way it used to, well, then maybe it's time to step away and say no to that, and that's perfectly fine. That so.
Yeah, it's part of growing too. As just humans, we grow and our interests change, and like when especially like if you have kids, your kids are into certain things, and as they grow up, you grow out of those things, or you meet new people, you have new hobbies, and so it is okay to say no because you develop more and grow more, and so it's important that you learn to say no so that you can continue to thrive in the things that bring you joy.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no sense in being stuck in the things that aren't bringing you joy, aren't better or people around you in one way or another. There's no sense in doing those things if they're not beneficial. So don't feel like you're got to force yourself to do those things, and when drag and you're really dreading getting out of bed to go do those things, then it might be time to reevaluate and maybe take a step back from some of that
Absolutely.
stuff. But for the listeners who are struggling with their own transition, dealing with life in general, just things are just tough for the listener that might be hearing this right now. Do you have any messages of hope or advice or anything like that you want to leave the listeners with who might be facing their own battles and seeking a way forward and a way out?
Yeah. First, I would say if you are in any way struggling in silence, you need to know that you're not alone. There's people out there that are going through the same thing you're going through. You're not alone. Seek help. If you have nobody, reach out to me. I want to help you because I want you to know that you're not alone, that there's people that are struggling with it or have been through on that journey and are here to help you because you're loved, you're important. The mission that you have may have changed when you got out of the military, but the mission is still important through, whether that be caring for your family, caring for a career, caring for friends and neighbors. You're important and you're valuable, so never feel like that. Don't let the failure be the finishing point. Failure can help you grow in so many more ways than successes can at times, and so do that. And then I would say like, what's helped me? And I will finish a doctorate in education after this summer. I have tried to be better in every aspect of my life. And me is that I finally realized just to pursue the things I'm passionate about. I was passionate about helping kids, and so I got an education. Passionate about providing a future for my family, and so that's what led my wife and I to buy a business that we get the opportunity to lead. And it's just we found things we were passionate about and we followed them. And if you want to be a successful entrepreneur or you want to be successful in anything in life, find something you're passionate about and pursue it. Because if you're passionate about it, whether it makes you rich or not, it'll make you rich in your happiness, and that's the most important thing. You'll trade everything for happiness. I'm sure of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And failures are not necessarily the negatives that a lot of us have in our heads when we're thinking about a failure. It's like, I failed at this thing, or whatever. I think it was Thomas Edison. I might have the person wrong. I might be attributing this quote to the wrong person, but if I am, I'll try to correct it. But it said, I didn't fail. I just found 10,000 ways it didn't work, and so it's like,
so true.
it's a success in a way, because it's like, okay, that didn't work. So I'm not going to waste my time doing that anymore. I'm going to continue doing some other things until I figure out something that does work. And, I say that to folks all the time, not that exact quote, but, it's the same idea with, therapy. You might go to therapy and you might have a therapist that just you're not clicking with. Okay, well, try somebody else. Or maybe that type of therapy that you're doing isn't working for you. Okay, well, try something else. There's so many different forms of therapy out there, and it's not necessarily that traditional sitting on the couch and spilling your guts out to a therapist. It could be all sorts of different things. There's so many things out there, and that's partially why I even have this show out there, is because there are so many things out. I want to help shed light on all the different things. Things like the resilient warrior is. Or sorry, the rebuilt warrior. My fault there. The rebuilt warrior is a great resource, and for guess now they do. They're sitting there thinking to themselves, "Man, I tried everything." Well, if you are just hearing about the now, well, you haven't tried everything. There's something else out there that you can give a shot, and you know what? If you try that and that doesn't work for you, there's something else too. You can keep trying until you figure it out. And there's no such thing as a failure in that respect. As long as you don't quit and you keep trying, I think it's all successes as far as that's concerned.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Absolutely. So
Absolutely. I agree with everything you say. Yeah. Yep. And just like the doctor told me, you can be better. So don't just sit there and wallow in what you think is failure or shortcomings. Just remember, you can be better.
Absolutely. Before we wrap up, where can folks go to find out more about the Rebuilt Warrior and everything about you, follow you, and find out about all that?
Yeah, I have a website called rebuiltwarrior.com. That's where you can just see all the different things that are offered. I have a book coming out. I'm going to release it on September the 10th. I joined the military September 12, 2002. I was a senior in high school. I joined after 9/11, the year after. So it was important for me. That was the day I wanted to release it. And so you can find out about the book. It's fun and have people reading it, because I want to make sure everything's factually the way I recall it. So that's done. And so I should have the first chapter on the website in the next month. And then I am filming a show called EO next month, July. And that show will be coming out. And so all that stuff will be accessible through the website. And then on social media, all the social media, the handle is the same as @the Rebuilt Warrior.
Awesome.
And so any of those, I try to post motivational stuff, and obviously any of those you can contact me, and I'm happy to support however I can.
Perfect. And I'll have links to all those in the show notes for folks who want to check it out and click through and find out more about what you have going on, follow you on social media, all that kind of stuff. So Eric, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your story. Definitely inspirational story. And I'm sure the Rebuilt Warrior is going to help out a ton of people who may be hearing about it for the first time here on the show, or somewhere down the line, someone might just pick it up and say, you know what, this is what I needed, and I'm sure that's going to help a ton of people. So thanks again.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you so much.